Ethos.
Welcome to The Collective, where every conversation ignites a new perspective. Join us as we delve into the journeys of remarkable individuals, explore the art of growth, resilience, and the power of a shared mission as we strive to be better together. Hey everybody, welcome back to The Collective. We have another fantastic show for you planned out today. I am stoked. We got John, we got Mike, we got Shaun, and I am pumped for this one. Now, while I am pumped, y'all should be too. Like the show, subscribe to the channel, hit the notification bell, do all the good stuff, get your emails whenever we go live, which is, of course, Fridays for The Collective, Wednesdays for The Gold Mine. If you have any thoughts, questions, comments, by all means, put them up in the comment section throughout the show, kind of like this one right here. Dan C. Good morning, gentlemen. Let it be writ in the scrolls of legend, this day was smitten most vigorously upon the backside of mediocrity. Well done, Dan. Well done. Now, if you also make sure you are signed up with the Reinforcement Loop. That is our weekly newsletter. It goes out every week. Make sure you get all the knowledge from the shows, plus a little bit of brain candy for you to chew on throughout the week. Other than that, let's get into the intros, and then we can get right into the convo. So, Gronski, you're up first. Quick 10 to 15 seconds. Who are you? Where you come from? All that good stuff.
Okay. Hey, John Gronski, spent 40 years in the Army, both active duty, Pennsylvania Army National Guard, and just great to be with you all. Looking forward to our conversation today.
Bam. I love it. It's been too long since I've had you on. We're going to get you back on more often. That is for sure. Dailey, how about yourself?
About half of that time. So 22 years on active duty in the Marine Corps in force reconnaissance and the stand-up of the Marine Raiders. And then I continue to work with those guys. So that's it for me.
Bam. I like it. Service beyond service. This is the way to go. Mike, how about yourself?
Yeah, I'm Mike Burke, originally from Montana. Spent about 25 years doing some things with some people in the 75th Ranger Regiment, and now retired about 3 years ago, and work in the private sector, and also the founder and host of Legends of the 75th.
Bam. I love how everyone says they're retired, but no one's ever stopped working. Like, fantastic. Shaun, how's the mountains treating you?
Things are good. What a great panel to talk about origins and ethos. So really looking forward to seeing where this one goes. I haven't given it like a ton of fundamental thoughts, so figure that all out during the show, see where it takes us all.
I'm sure it'll take us down a number of rabbit holes, as it normally does. So quick little one here. Dan C. jumped in here and said, took me all week for that one. I have no doubt. And John Menard jumping in. Morning, Team Collective. Good to see you, John. We had a lot of Johns just sitting here on the show. This is fantastic. So I want to dive right into this. The topic of origins and ethos got started because Shaun actually hit me up and said, we should do a show on foundations, like on the things that built up who we are and the systems and the things that came together to create our lives. And I was like, this is a great idea. I got a perfect panel for this, and you guys are here. So I want to get your guys' first thoughts. Gronski, I'm going to hit you. Origins and ethos. What it triggered in the back of your brain when you heard that?
Yeah, what I thought about was, starting right at the beginning of the birth of the United States, 1778, von Steuben at Valley Forge, Pennsylvania, is really the first one who started to inculcate values into our Army. And, he created the Blue Book, which our current Sergeant Major of the Army has a updated Blue Book. And really, von Steuben talked about professionalism, talked about leadership, talked about integrity. All of the things that I think makes our Army great, our military great. So that's what I immediately went to when I thought about this. And then the other thing is, United States Army, our 7 Army values, and they actually weren't developed until our current Army values in the United States Army were not developed until 1995. And it was at that time, downsizing the Army after the Cold War ended. Around 600,000 troops were going to be leaving our force. And there was a, kind of low morale and people wondering, hey, where are we going now? And General Sullivan, who was the chief of staff of the Army, came out, had a group develop these 7 Army values and just really want to use them as guideposts and give our Army a sense of purpose again. So I think that's really what it's about: guidepost, sense of purpose, direction, that type of thing.
Oh, I dig it. This is an awesome start. Dailey, what were your first thoughts?
My first thoughts were, I was fortunate enough in the time that I was on active duty to be a part of the stand-up of a couple of units. And so, anytime you're starting a new unit, particularly in the special operations realm, if you think back to the OSS or the SOE or the SAS, any of these, units, the Marine Raiders in World War II, the Rangers, you had to start it with a set of values, ethos, what you wanted that, what that unit was going to be about. So that was my initial thought on it. And then to hit on what other John was saying, the Marine Corps' core values, we only have 3 because I guess we're Marines. We stole them from the Navy, and we didn't, ours, I think we came up with in 94. So on our courage and commitment, so yeah, I guess not a lot of thought was given to necessarily, the need for core values and as the Marine Corps, we've got a million sayings, mottos, super fidelis on down the line. But it wasn't until the mid 90s, I think, largely when there's kind of a shift in the military happening, that the services, saw the need to kind of codify their core values.
Interesting. I wonder how much of that has to do with, especially the time period in the 90s, because there was a lot of no one was really being used that much, right? So all of a sudden you have to remind yourself of why, where you come from again. I like this. Mike, what are you thinking?
Yeah, I love this conversation. John, you talking about Baron von Steuben and drill and ceremony and, the Blue Book, that's actually the formation of the 75th Ranger Regiment. That was actually the first manual that they carried. And we still, to this day, the 75th Ranger Regiment makes reference to it. And it's part of the history that they talk about from day one. And it's funny because I was just having this conversation with my daughter about drill and ceremony. She's in Marine Corps JROTC here at East Coweta High School. And she was, we were talking about drill and ceremony, and she passed the test. My wife was like, why drill and ceremony? And I was explaining, like, hey, this is like the origin, good order and discipline, all this different kind of stuff. Like, you got to get that right fundamentally before you get anything. You go into the Marine Corps, you go into the Army, the first thing you're starting to do is drill and ceremony. Like, hey, I'm going to march you from this in-processing station, and they're just yelling at you and they're getting after you, to get to there. And then it's just a building block from that all the way through basic training, as far as drill and ceremony. And it's about, just good order and discipline. And then, to tie it into Chance, what you were talking about, you talk about the United States Army coming out of Vietnam. And a lot of the issues that was plaguing the Army, and you talk to many of those, officers that later became, general officers, and they talk about how they used to have to do checks, in the barracks and staff duties and everything else, and they used to do it with a sidearm because they were afraid they were going to get jumped by their subordinate soldiers and everything else because the military was so undisciplined. And all that stuff plays into a factor. It's actually the reason that the 75th Ranger Regiment was established, under Abrams' charter, was basically a select group of individuals within the United States Army that it's not about the standards and the discipline, it's about the enforcement of the standards and the discipline. 75th Ranger Regiment actually has no different standards than the Army has. We just enforce them, and we hold people accountable to them. And then basically serve for a short period of time in this organization and go back out into the Army and carry those principles, those values, and everything else in the from the 75th Ranger Regiment into the rest of the Army. And now you look at the Army as a whole, and you look at all the COCOM commanders, and many of the SAR majors that are non-SAR majors, and many of them had their origins in the 75th Ranger Regiment.
This is already going down an interesting lane, and I'm stoked. Shaun, what do you got? What was your first thoughts?
So, interestingly enough, Mike, I've been recently watching some of the 75th Ranger videos that are kind of circulating.
Yeah, you stumble across any of ours?
I've seen some of your stuff, and you know what I really appreciate about this current or this more modern representation of the 75th is you don't have to listen to music, you don't have to listen to any words, you just frickin' get it right away. You feel it, you feel the spirit of it. You know what I mean? And I think that's what ethos is. You guys are talking about a blue book that I've never seen, but I don't need to see the blue book. I just need to see the man and feel the blue book in him. And so ethos to me is spirit. It is the central pillar of what that man is about. His ethos, her ethos. It's a feel, it's a vibe, it's a thing that you can understand before the first word is said or the first page is turned. So the blue book is awesome, whatever it is. But the blue book doesn't need to exist in my mind when I see Mike's videos, because I can feel the book. And that is ethos, man. It's a feeling more than it is a written paragraph, I feel.
Yes, indeed. And interestingly enough, I went back to the origins when I first started thinking about this, and I was like, what was the need at the time for, like, what was it that was required that made us think we're going to do this thing? So for my own background with the Canadian Combat Engineers, the concept was we needed pioneers. We needed people to lay down a path into the West. And that was where it all kind of started in the beginning. 1903 is when we got our royal warrant kind of deal. But that was the concept. So the foundation that laid the ethos for us, in that you had to be gritty, you had to be able to withstand the weather, you had to be able to work long days, you had to be able to work, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And I think same thing with the formation of the Army, the formation of Det 1, Rangers. There was a need that was out there that no one else was fulfilling, but it required a certain type of people. And that's where you had to kind of lay down, codify the rules, as we say, you know what I mean? Dailey, you look like you got something on your mind. Or, what do you got, Shaun? Go ahead.
Just want to be careful there right at the start of the show, because I don't feel like ethos gets codified per se. So in 92, when we were forming up JTF2, the first special operations unit in Canada, we didn't have a blue book. We didn't have like a whole bunch of paragraphs written down to guide our way. Every day we were kind of making it up. And so like the ethos was being almost developed in real time. Now, I'm saying that carefully because I don't want that to be taken out of context. It's not like we were designing a new unit in a way that we wanted to. The unit was designing itself, but we weren't using a book to design it. We were using ourselves and our own spirit to design it. And it wasn't just a 1 man or 10 men who were like central to the design of the unit. It was everyone. There were little parts here and big parts there, and then the next day it would be inverted, little parts here, little parts there, big parts over here. And so the unit formed itself through a spirit. It wasn't given guardrails to operate in per se. So the evolution of JTF2 didn't have like, this is what you will do and this is what you won't do. We almost had a blank slate to step into the void and let our ethos evolve, the spirit, the feel of the unit evolve. In those first few years, it wasn't written down on a single sheet of paper what we were supposed to be or what we could be or what we will be. It was just a feeling amongst the men that we were working towards without sometimes even openly speaking about it.
I would, now I don't know this, and I want to ask you specifically as well as Dailey. Wasn't there like a mandate? Was there something that set forward saying, hey, we need, like, for JTF2, I know it was taking over from CERT. There was a hostage rescue mandate that was kind of being taken over. So wouldn't that be your guideline and then be given free reign from there? Does that make sense, Shaun?
Yeah. So a mandate is not an ethos, in my opinion.
That makes sense.
You know, so someone gives me a rule book, that doesn't mean that's a feeling. Make sense?
Yeah. No, I'm tracking. Dailey, you got any thoughts on this one?
I mean, I see both points. I kind of think we're almost saying the same thing. I mean, just like with you, Chance, you had a mission to conduct pioneering stuff. In order to do that, you need people who fit that mold, who have that mindset, that mentality, that ethos. I think the same with JTF, the same when we stood up Detachment 1 in 2002, 2003. We were given a mission, but it very much landed on the commanding officer that was picked and the senior enlisted within the organization to which happens very much in SOF. We tend to pick people that are like us. So, people that we like and people that have the same shared values that we have. that happens in the military, but I think it's more focused sometimes maybe in SOF. So when you're picking kind of the same types of people, you hopefully are going to have the shared sense of not only mission, but, and once you have that, then you really, I think, particularly when organizations are formed in times of crisis, right? One of the soft truths is that you can't form soft units after emergencies occur. And I would kind of beg to differ because, we were. It's not optimal, but it happens. And when it does, that sense of mission, and again, if you go back in history and look at the SOE, the SAS in North Africa, the American Special Operations, you kind of see it time and time again. One, you see a need that's not met, quite often the right person at the right time, or maybe it's at least the right person for the initial setup, and then it carries on. What really establishes a unit's ethos, and Mike mentioned it, is are you going to once that pillar, the guy who got the thing started moves on, is the community going to continue to uphold the standards? And that's really what I think it comes down to. A unit won't survive first contact. It won't survive for any length of time. A lot of the culture is for kind of what we're talking about when we talk about ethos, and the first 4 letters of that is cult. A lot of times when units are stood up, it's based on the force of will of one person, and that's a cult of personality. If that can continue and survive to the point where standards are identified and standards are upheld, then the unit has obviously a great chance of succeeding.
I really like this, and I love both sides of this argument. Mike, I want to get your thoughts on this. Where are you coming to on this particular topic?
No, I've been sitting here listening to this because this is just such an awesome conversation, and I really liked, Dailey, John, how basically, one thing you talked about was, after the crisis, and I think of the 75th Ranger Regiment, we were kind of the in between. Everybody had their clear missions when we talk about special operations, and quite frankly, even the Army and the other branches as a whole. In Ranger Regiment, we've been training for a lot of things that necessarily at the time the perspective wasn't that was going to be our mission. However, the need was identified primarily by General McChrystal, the JSOC commander at the time. He needed to pressurize networks. He needed more task force capable of doing things that normally tier 1 units had only been able to do. But he just didn't have enough people without wearing the SEAL Team 6 guys, the Delta guys out completely. There was no real way to do it, and we just kind of rise to the occasion. Well, we've been training for this. We just haven't been afforded the opportunity. We demonstrated things during the invasion of both countries. Let's try this. And then, it just kind of went from there, and we found a new relevance. And now you talk about, the 75th as a whole and the missions that they're doing and the adaptations that they're doing. Not many of us really kind of honestly predicted that was going to go that way. We all hoped it would go that way, if I'm being honest, but we didn't really kind of think it would. But I will say that it still ties back to this conversation about ethos and accountability, because we're the only special operation unit that's able to do it with privates. Meaning we have privates that graduate basic training, go through basically a condensed assessment and selection that's really 2 months long, and the next month they could be getting certified and deploying to combat, and they're on target, and they're expected to do things that normally, when we talk about special operations, are advanced guys that at least have 6 to 12 years of experience, in some capacity. It could even be conventional capacity, prior to doing that. And the only reason we're able to do it is, quite frankly, because of all the things that we're talking about here.
I dig it. Gronski, got any thoughts on any of this?
A lot of thoughts on it, and a great conversation. I appreciate everybody's input there. But values aren't a checklist. They are the foundation of what John Dailey said. Culture of an organization, and just to have those shared values, I think, are important to get everybody moving in the right direction. But the thing is, it's up to units to operationalize those values. I mean, if you have these values, whatever, they're written they're written in the blue book, or they're written on a poster, it's hanging on a wall. That doesn't mean anything at all, to be honest with you. It's how do leaders operationalize the values in whatever unit they're leading, and that could be a military unit, that could be a civilian organization, and I think that's the key. One thing I used to do when we'd be out there training, for example, let's say we did assault and objective. After the exercise is over, get the guys together, have an after action review, and then after you figure out, hey, what did we do well? What didn't we do so well? We want to change next time. What lessons did we learn? I used to go around and ask them, how did the Army values just factor into this exercise we just did? How did loyalty factor in? How did duty factor in? How did honor factor in? And, have the soldiers explain, even in the course of this exercise, assault and objective, this is how the 7 Army values actually factored in to what we did. That's one way to operationalize values. I think leaders have to talk about them. Leaders have to lead by example. I like what was said earlier by Mike about enforcing standards. I think, a lot of people don't think about this, but if you want to cultivate trust in an organization, enforce standards. If you want to break trust in an organization, don't enforce the standards, because a leader loses complete credibility if they don't enforce the standards in an organization. Standards are there for a reason. And some people think in some conventional units, standards aren't enforced. If that's the case, then that unit's going to be not a very good unit. So there's so much more to say on this whole thing, but I just kind of wanted to throw those thoughts out there and see where it goes.
I really like this. And Shaun, I want to actually come to you on this in a second, but the thing that always bugged me about standards wasn't that there were standards, is that the standards change depending on who you talk to. And that's wrong, right?
Jumping on that real quick.
Sure.
One thing I say to leaders when I go out and I do these leadership workshops, I said, and one thing a leader doesn't want to do is make a stupid rule or make a stupid standard, or don't make a rule that is impossible to enforce. I mean, a lot of leaders will create their own standards within an organization. Of course, we have Army standards, but leaders could create their own standards or rules, whatever you want to call it. And those are the 2 cardinal sins any leader will make.
Yep.
Make a stupid rule that doesn't make any damn sense. You don't really need that rule. Or make a rule that's impossible to enforce. I can give you an example on that if you want, but I think that's so important for leaders not to do.
100% agreed. Shaun, what are you thinking?
It's a video that I saw from the 75th, and they were on the obstacle course, and they were just freaking getting after it. And there wasn't a whole lot of barking. And that's one thing that I really appreciated about the video. No one had to get anyone all fired up, because everyone was all fired up all by themselves. And when they were doing the obstacle course, the camera was zooming in on these various characters, and it wasn't like, I didn't get the sense that they were like cherry picking characters. It was almost like random characters that they just get all up in their grill. And what I did appreciate about every single moment is anyone that was around that person was freaking getting after it and helping that other person get after it in various different ways. And sometimes it was chirping, and sometimes it was let's go, and sometimes it was all the different ways to make sure that everybody was in it to win it. And here's what I picked up the most. And this is the important distinction for me when it comes to ethos, when it comes to spirit, when it comes to the vibe of an organization. All those young fellas, and I mean most of them were pretty young, they wanted to like meet the standard and beat it. And that is an important distinction for me. They wanted to, rather than begrudgingly met the standard. They weren't begrudging anything. They wanted the standard and more. They were freaking all fired up about the standard almost defined them as part of the greater standard that was surrounding them. And so that's pretty uncommon nowadays, where individuals will engage so intensely in a moment because they feel that that's what they're supposed to be doing as a person, because they're representing something that is bigger than them. The ethos of the moment is rare nowadays that I see that. And I know we talk about it, and I know that there's lots of units that do it quietly in the shadows. But right now, like 75th is all up in my peanut, because every video I see, like, it is, quite frankly, the best representation of ethos that I've seen in a long time. And I'd love to say something like that about Canada right now. And I know it's happening in Canada. It's just that the 75th is freaking nailing it in respect to capturing it on video, on social media. And I don't see any problem with that, because if no one's capturing it, no one knows how freaking rad you can be as a human being or within an organization. And so I'd love to see Canada doing a little bit more of that, but my hat's off to the 75th right now in respect to ethos.
Yeah, I got a couple of things I want to say about that. One, that video that you keep on talking about, Shaun, is the reason for that is because they're trying to keep up with the Regimental Sergeant Major Masters. That dude is him and Brett Johnson. They came before him. I mean, just genetic freaks. Just, I mean, you're talking about 40-year-old, approaching 50-year-old men that, I'm not saying they weren't limping afterwards, but they were not going to let those young kids beat them. But what's funny about when you talk about social media, the regimental PAO, public affairs officer, Major Wright, one, I totally agree, they're just nailing it. And it goes back into the standards conversation is I won't say his name, but it all shifted about 3 years ago. And their office, the PAO office, because of this one young NCO that had movie making and prior experience prior to joining the military, that really did changed how they did all their stuff so that you could feel the emotion, you could feel all this stuff. What's funny about that dude is they actually released that guy for standards last year because of a standard he violated. So even though he'd done all these great things, it doesn't matter. A violation of standards, a violation of standards. It's time to kind of beat Pete. And, John, I wanted to say something. I find that a lot of leaders, especially non-commissioned officers, it's not that it's a standard, it's a pet peeve that they try to make into a standard. And I had a leader that told me this one time. He goes, listen, gentlemen, this is not a standard. This is a pet peeve of mine, but I'm the leader, so you're going to listen to me. And we're like, yeah, okay, that's fair. Thank you for at least telling that and being upfront with us. I can respect that.
I'm down with that. If I had an NCO that actually said, hey man, this is just my own personal thing, could you not? I'd be like, yeah, man, no worries. That's not a big deal. But when standards are just created for no reason other than because I don't like it, it drives me absolutely up the wall. Dailey, you got any thoughts on any of this?
Yeah. And one of the reasons I was super stoked, when this topic came up when I got the email yesterday, is that just recently over the last couple of months, I've had the opportunity to talk with a couple military units and a couple of civilian organizations about culture, and two of the thoughts that have been like pinging is one of the things that I came up with that I'm kind of proud of is a little Venn diagram. And I think that the things that there are two components when we talk about ethos or an organizational culture. And the first is the symbols that we use, right, to identify ourselves. And then the stories that we tell about ourselves, about our past, about our legacy. And those are important. We got to have them. And every good military organization, every good company has these things, symbols and stories. But they're nothing if you don't have standards and systems All right, the standards that we hold each other to, and then the systems that we use to make sure that we're holding each other to them. The culture in a unit, the ethos of a unit, is only as good as what the junior man, the youngest soldier, sailor, airman, Marine, in that organization sees. Right? If we have a if we have a standard that we don't enforce, then it's really not a standard, right? It's something that we say, right? It's something that's a story that we told ourselves one time, or it's something that's on the wall. But in order for, the felt culture or the felt ethos is where those, that Venn diagram comes together. The stories, the symbols, the systems that we have to measure our standards. And when I was researching a little bit for his talk, and I just thought it was totally badass. All right. The word standard obviously comes from a battle flag, right? It, in the olden days when we march, the flag bearer would march the line of battle, plant the flag. But, and I'm sure everybody here obviously knows that, but the meaning of that word, it came from Frankish, right? Charlemagne and his guys. And the word was actually stand hard. Right. This is where we stand hard, which kind of gives me like goosebumps thinking about it. As leaders, we've got to march up to a point, plant the flag and say, hey, this is, if we want to be who we say we are, if we want to be what our symbols, that we have on the wall, if we want to be worthy of the stories that we tell, right, then we've got to stand hard, all right, on this. And that's, you will, I was a part a number of years ago, I think 2018, 2019, there was a series of unfortunate events that happened across special operations. And there was a mandate to have a bunch of senior-ish type people come in and talk. And it was the comprehensive review is what it was called. And one of the things that one of the SEALs said it, and it always stuck with me. It's like, I started walking and really paying attention when I walked into the team rooms. And in almost every case, you would walk in and there was a team flag, high up on the wall. Beneath it, there was a Trident flag or NSW flag. And then below it was the American flag. And it was consistent, across team after team after team. And it wasn't something that anybody thought, right? But it was a way of saying, what symbol is most important. I mean, you look behind Mike, there's no question, right? You got the American flags where it should be, then the Ranger tab where it should be. It's easy, and it's easy after 20 years of warfare, right? To start getting confused, about what's the most important thing. What standards are we going to hold ourselves to and hold other people to?
I think this is interesting. I've been watching Band of Brothers with my young boys, and we just watched the first episode a couple weeks ago, and it was about Currahee, right? The mountain that they would all run up. And it made me think, as you were talking, Dailey, there is that we create a collective goal by putting that standard down. Boom, the flag is there. This is where we hold the line. And by doing that, we're creating something for all the people surrounding you to believe in. It gives you something to seek, to chase after almost. And those values should be at the top of the hill, right? They should be at the pinnacle rather than halfway down or right at the base. There's symbolism to it. And I'm just digging this a lot. Gronski, you got any thoughts on any of this?
Yeah, I mean, I think those values should be at the bottom. They should be a foundation. I mean, again, we could use whatever metaphor we want to use. Hey, the other thing I want to kind of get into too is, just like we've been talking about the organizational values of the Marines and the Rangers and Army and all that. I really think, and I talk to people a lot about this, is that it's real important for people to understand what their own personal core values are too. And I think the sooner we could get people to do that, the better. Because again, if you're going to join an organization like the Marines or the Army, and you know what the Marine values are, the Army values are, if you don't know what your own values are, is there a match there or not? The other thing is, and I tell leaders to do this, and this takes a little bit of courage on their part. You could sit in front of your people and tell them what your values are. as a leader. But how about if a leader, after working with a team for whatever, 3 months, 6 months, gets the team together and they say, hey guys, what do you think my values are? Rather than telling them what your values are, ask them what they think your values are based on the way they saw you behave and make decisions over the last number of months you've been together. I think that's the most powerful thing at all, because you could have a value, but if you're not making decisions in accordance with that value, if you're not behaving in accordance with that value, it's just a word on paper. So I really think it comes down to decisions, it comes down to behavior, and really you could bring that up to the organization too. You know, how does an organization operate in the field? How does an organization operate on a mission? And that will tell you what that organization's values are, no matter what is written, you know, in a blue book or any other piece of paper. So that's what I wanted to get out there.
I really like that. I think way more, there'd be way more value for leaders having their troops tell them what they believe their values are than anything else. That is freaking awesome. I love that. Sean, you got right? Sean?
So a couple of things. One, and this is not making any point from you guys. Two things. One was I really like what John Dailey was saying about the planting a flag down and standing strong. You know, I'd never really put that together as the standard. I mean, obviously we all understand what the standard is, but then planting it in the ground and treating the standard as the standard, I'd never really thought it through deeply enough, I guess. But it does raise an interesting point in my mind as he was saying it, that we're so easy to give up standards. I mean, as large organizations, the organization as a whole will let the standard slip until maybe you say to someone, dude, you're freaking retreating right now. You're retreating with the standard. You're cowardly. Like, that's just never really said, is it? I mean, we all think it, but we all use different words. When the standard starts slipping, it might not be cowardly. It might be another word. But I'd never really thought about frickin' planting that standard down and not taking a step backwards in the cowardly sense. So that's just one thought. The other thing that maybe what John Gronski was talking about, at least what I took away from it, is, as leaders, perhaps we should be asking someone, well, what do you think my standards are? But then there's a step before that, like before you even hit a unit or before you even hit an organization, like you're several states to the left or right of wherever you're going to land. Your reputation precedes you. So your reputation is a standard to some degree. And depending on how you're perceived by the organization that you're stepping into, or how the organization that you're stepping out of perceived you and passed the word up the line, reputation is a big part of how that can shape or corrupt ethos.
And not only that, I want to touch on this as well. From Gronski's point here is the fact that you can go into an organization with no values and be taught good values that you can then apply to yourself. But the challenge is to know whether those are the correct values or not, because you could enter into an organization and be taught values that are not helpful in any way for yourself, but are helpful for the organization. So there's another beautiful point to this. And I'm going to ask you guys a question, but I want to hit these comments real quick. Dan C jumped in and said, accountability is a core value of integrity. And absolutely, when you're talking about core values, and Ethos and Arrows Project on the Instagram side said Ethos, very nice. And BC's Cimmerian, a very Canadian example of the regimental catechism, chivalry, gallantry, and dash from RCR Battle School haunts me to this day. But to you guys' point, though, like there a lot of things can be said, but unless they're understood, that's a whole other thing. Because when I think of some of the privates that some of the sappers that I worked with when I was a sapper, they didn't understand the core values of what it was to be an engineer. Neither did I. But I wasn't being taught that when I should have been being taught that. That was our own failing as a unit. But I wanted to ask you guys specifically, from the units that you guys have been a part of, from your experiences within the military, as we use it as a proxy for anywhere else, what are some of the things that you guys have taken away? What are some of the values that you've not only heard, but lived and experienced coming out of the units that you guys are coming out of. Mike, I'm going to start with you. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, the foundation of who I am is because of the unit that I came into. I don't need to sit here and get into it, but my childhood, my upbringing, I'm not going to discredit my parents. Work ethic was, at the forefront of who I was and what my parents taught me. But, some of these value things, and integrity and, keeping your word, I didn't quite understand those. And I, had suffered and been through so many things in my childhood that I didn't know how they applied to me as a man. And to be honest with you, when I first got to Ranger Regiment, that wasn't actually instilled in me any better. My first couple of years, and I talk about this a lot in Ranger Regiment, wasn't great. Honestly, the leaders that I had were more concerned about drinking, fucking with, sorry, messing with privates, hazing and all this different kind of stuff, rather than training and, the standards and all these different kind of things. And it took one individual to really kind of set the course for what would become the trajectory of the rest of my life that my values have been built off of since then. And that's Master Sergeant Josh Wheeler. And I believe I've even mentioned him in this podcast before. Silver Star recipient, died in a hostage rescue incident, a little over 10 years ago, with CAG. And, he came in and he taught me, hey, this is what it means to be a leader. This is what it really, really, truly means to take care of your individuals. This is what it means to be a Ranger. And this is why, and he used to always say commando. He just loved the term, and, growing up in the 80s, we all love the word commando. I mean, let's just be honest here. So he'd be like, we're commandos, and then third, what it meant to be a husband and a father. He really kind of taught me that kind of stuff. And it is, just as, John has said multiple times, it is the foundation of who I am. And, what is a cornerstone of how the rest of my life has kind of been devised. But if it hadn't been those individuals, I don't know how I would have turned up. I'm going to be honest with you. I got a lot of cousins. I got a lot of other relatives that, they don't pass the 3-friend test. Let me just put it to you that way. My 3-friend test is, would I trust them with my bank account? Would I trust them with my wife? And would I trust them with my children if they were out in the woods with no cell service? And a lot of my relatives, they don't check any of those boxes. But the individuals that came on along later in my life, they absolutely do. And it's because of those individuals I've grown into the human being that I've become, the man that I've become and the leader that I've become.
Bam. I love it. Gronski, what are you thinking?
It's all about the leader that you have of the team, of the organization. What I learned in the Army from good leaders that I've had, I guess maybe I'll also learn this from poor leaders that I've had. But to me, what it all comes down to in the military, and really I think it comes, no matter what organization you're in, is placing the welfare of your followers ahead of your own welfare. That's easy to say. I'm sure everybody here agrees with that. It's easy to say, but really when you get right down to reality, it's a hard thing for some people to do. It's a hard thing for me to do. I mean, we're not hardwired to put the welfare of other people before our own welfare, unless I think the only people who are hardwired to do that are parents. I mean, what parent wouldn't want to put the welfare of their kids ahead of their own welfare? But as a leader, you got to do that. That's why not everybody is a good leader, because not every leader is willing to make that sacrifice to put the welfare of their people ahead of their own welfare. And that's more than being last in the chow line and letting your people eat first and you eat last. It's more than that. There's a lot more to that. There's a lot more sacrifice involved with that. But that's one thing I learned in my time in the Army, and that's one thing I strive to do. Am I successful at it? I don't know. I guess you'd have to ask the people I led. But it's to me, that's the essence of leadership.
Well, I think just having as many people wanting you to come out and teach them how to lead would tell you that. That's a big one. Like being able to speak and write your book and have people want to learn the lessons that you taught would tell you very quickly that you probably led pretty well. But interesting that, sadly enough, you said that
but is that a good metric?
I think it's a metric.
It's a metric. I don't think it's a good metric because what we're talking about is an uneducated buyer as the example.
Yeah.
Okay. So let me paint a quick case study. So Gronski is an example. He's behind a podium on one side of the stage, and then there's another TED speaker who once talked about how he had observed from a distance how Navy SEAL leaders eat last, and in that flash of wisdom, somehow now he's like the speaker on leadership. He's the speaker on ethos. He's the speaker on origins. So
I know who you're who you're talking about.
But I don't want to drop any names. I don't want to drop any names because my point is this: there's 1,000 of them that are doing the same thing, but they don't understand it themselves because they've never lived it. They've only observed it. They made the casual reference to, oh, that's what leadership is all about. Oh, that's what ethos is all about. Oh, that's where origins come from. They are casual third-party observations in my mind that aren't felt experiences. They're not lived. They're observed. And so now we have this misunderstanding of what ethos and origin is because it's being put across in a TED conversation that is being spooled around the world from individuals that just really can't even properly spell ethos, in my opinion.
Hey,
so
Shaun,
it's a problem.
Yeah, if you're not in the crucible of leading, and you've only studied it or wrote about it at an academic level, no, you're not going to get it. As people right here as part of this podcast today would get it. You've got to be in the crucible of leadership to truly understand what that means. And you've got to make those sacrifices that we all talk about putting others first and leading by example and doing the hard stuff to take care of your people. I mean, that's what it's about.
So then if as we all know that's the case, and we all have a better understanding of the TED Talk than the TED Talker. So where's the disconnect? How is it that Gronski isn't in front of all the TED Talk audiences of the world versus other individuals who are maybe not as deeply understanding of this subject? Because I've got to say it right now. When at the start of the podcast, I identified that I hadn't given it a lot of thought leading up to this podcast, but that's not true. I've been thinking my whole life about it. And so if I've been thinking my whole life about it, I'm pretty sure I could give a half-decent TED Talk, but I don't think I'm the right guy. So if I don't think I'm the right guy, who's the right guy? And I know it isn't the guy who's never served. So, this is the problem with this conversation. We're having perhaps an educated conversation on what ethos is, while contrasting. There's a definition of ethos out there in the general population that is just simply not educated. That's a distinction for me.
Yeah, I think it goes into what we're seeing currently, and maybe we don't want to get into this, but I'll throw it out there. And by the way, Shaun, I've been saying this about this individual for a long time. While I appreciate his books, it's all theory from his perspective. It's not application. But, it's like a lot of these veterans that get the podiums, get the mics, get the fame, get all this different kind of stuff. Why? There's so many better human beings out there. It's not that they're bad, but there's way better individuals to speak on the subjects they're speaking on, or to conduct the interviews that they're conducting. So why is it? Well, it's sound bites. They're better at, the author you're talking about, he's better at creating sound bites than you are. All of us. He's just good at punchy little sound bites that are clippable, can be shared on the socials, have all these titles and everything else. I mean, half these books that you read, from military leaders, or even the one you're referencing, the entire book's in the first chapter. The rest is just nonsense and explaining things over and over and over again for no goddamn reason, And then at the end, there's probably a little bit more punchiness as the book ends up. But at the end of the day, they're just better at marketing with these sound bites than we are.
That's the challenge. And Dailey, I'm going to come to you here in a second, but I make pretty good videos, I got to think.
Well, Yeah, you do, but I mean, it's just, there's a lot of different factors. It's not
For
just one. It's not one factor, but I'm just, as a podcast host, it's also something that I'm constantly looking at. It's
Yeah.
like, man, like we said the same thing that this guy's saying, but why is this one, got 1 million views and everything else? I mean, literally. Yeah, sorry. Now I'm gonna go off a little
No,
bit.
I'm trying.
I literally,
Look,
I have been a podcast
it is
host.
relevant. It
I
is
have- I've been-
relevant.
I've been a podcast host for going on 6 years. Okay. I have one video of a soundbite of another podcast that I went on that has I think it's approaching 1 million views. And it's actually completely taken out of context. And the only reason for it is because this is where the guy decided, and I'm not mad at him. He's a great friend of mine, but he cut it. He said, when Navy SEALs are in trouble, they call Rangers. When, and it goes through this thing, and it's just a practical application. I mean, I'm not saying that it's relevant right now. I'm just saying at the time, the regimental sergeant major had a quote. It was for us in Iraq, it was the truth. When everybody was in trouble, they called Rangers. And we were talking about special operations. But that one soundbite, because it's so catchy, it's so controversial, and I say Navy SEALs at the beginning of it. Well, I didn't actually. I said Delta Force at the beginning of it, but he cut it for Navy SEALs. It's just become this thing, and it's like, what in the hell, man?
Well, it is relevant, as Shaun's saying. It's it's part of it. One of the challenges is getting the word out. We do pretty good stuff here, and sometimes it doesn't do well. Other times it does. It's tough. Dailey, what are you thinking?
A lot of stuff. All right. But first, the SOCOM finally kind of had a realization that, we are supposed to think of ourselves as quiet professionals. And if all, everybody in special operations, everybody in an organization feels that way, then the only people that you hear from are the people who are not quiet professionals. So you need to be professional and not that quiet, right? We need to have, people, like are on this panel sharing, opinions, thoughts, leadership. But I had two experiences really. And the first kind of goes to what Mike was saying, joining the Marine Corps, getting sent, booted off of a bus, with my sea bag to my first unit in the grunts, walking in. I didn't know it at the time, but the bulk of the platoon was out in the field training. There was this corporal who wasn't, which should have been kind of a red flag, but because I only knew what I didn't know. He came and was like, hey, I got some beer in my room, and I like beer, right? So I'm private, sitting there drinking beer with the corporal, while he's just kind of running down all of the the other leadership within the platoon. And I went to my room. Guys came out of the field, and this other corporal came and came into my little cubicle in the squad bay and was like, "Hey, you been drinking?" I'm like, "Well, yeah, I had a beer with that corporal." He's like, just gave me a look, and I knew. I'm like, "Oh, okay." But it was after hours and everything. But he's like, "Hey, I just wanted to, welcome to the platoon. Did you get chow? Do you know where the chow is? And I very quickly, in my half drunk, 18 age mind, realized right then that, one was, somebody who was kind of looking to either, take advantage of me or looking to exert some kind of influence over me. One was a leader, right? One was immediate concern was that, that I was taken care of. And very quickly became apparent that, I could follow, kind of like in platoon, right? Elias or Barnes, right? You can pick one of the two, who's going to be your daddy. And I was like, hey, I'm going to, follow this guy. This is the corporal that, has got cami paint all over his face. He's uniforms all ripped up. He's just come out of the field, but his first thought was making sure that I got to the chow. And that kind of goes to the idea of what John was talking about of to be a leader, you've got to put the welfare of your people before your own. And a lot of times that, when it comes to standards, a lot of times that putting their welfare above your own is enforcing standards. that first corporal had no intention of enforcing standards, right? He had no intention of putting my welfare before his own. But the second one would absolutely boot me in the butt, if I wasn't, out for PT in the morning, if I wasn't, doing all the things that I was supposed to be doing. And I feel like I learned a ton in that first, 48-hour period in the infantry that hopefully is, stuck with me.
Take it. Nothing quite like an introduction into the infantry as well. John, I know you got to head out right away, and I want to give you an opportunity to give any final thoughts or anything still bubbling in the back of your brain on today's conversation, or anything at all before you head out.
Yeah, I think, again, like I already said, it really comes down to leadership. An organization could have values, but unless the leader exemplifies those values, makes decisions in accordance with those values, behaves in accordance with those values, they're not going to, it's probably not going to take with 80%, 90% of the people in that unit. I want to leave you with one of my favorite quotes here. I hope I get it right. I think it's attributed to Churchill, but he said, "An army of lions led by a lamb is no match for an army of lambs led by a lion." So I really think it all comes down to leadership. A lion could lead an army of lambs successfully. A lamb is going to screw up an army of lions. So really, it all comes down to leadership when we're talking about ethos, when we're talking about values, if you really wanted to take in an organization. So that's my final thought.
Bam. I love it. Well, we hate to lose you for the rest of the conversation, but I appreciate you hanging out with us for an hour, and we'll get you back on at another point, and we can have the whole conversation at that point in time. So
I just want to say it's an honor to be with you all. I mean, the panelists just so great, so many years of dedicated service and hard service and sacrifice. So thank you for letting me be a part of this, and you all have a great day.
Always
Gronski, you're the
Thanks.
best.
He's got to bounce, unfortunately. We'll see him next time, though, so that is all good. Now, I have a couple comments here I want to touch on, and then I got a question for y'all, which I really is going to be quite interesting. So Dan C. jumped in here. He said, following your core values can be disastrous through career, but everyone is watching, and people learn from watching and evaluating. In the end, I want my integrity to be spoken of, not my career. And that is a great point, because sometimes to hold your integrity, you got to be a whistleblower. You got to talk up the chain of command and say, hey, man, this isn't going to fly. That's not what we do here. That kind of deal as well. So it can be professionally disastrous or difficult, but you're going to feel better, I think, holding to your values long term than you would. KH jumped in here and said, good to see you, Carl. He says, if all professionals were quiet professionals, no knowledge would be passed on, which is another great point. And he says, if your actions don't reflect your ethos, then you don't have an ethos. That is a great point as well. Now, the question
doesn't mean silent.
What do you got, Mike?
Quiet doesn't mean silent. Silent professionals. And I think it's all about the way you do it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Agreed. Now, the question I have for you guys, so John, you've been able to stand up. Stand up with the unit that you were part of. Shaun, same deal. Mike, you have a great understanding of how the Rangers were put together and all this stuff. But if you were to look back at who you were when you started that and the units that you have now that are out there doing the work, would you recognize the people serving today with that same person? Does that initial spark of the unit, of the idea of what you guys were going to do, does that still translate today? And John, I'm going to start with you. What do you think?
That's a great question, and absolutely, I would recognize them. And I'm kind of in a position where I do. I still show up every day, and I get to see, great Americans doing great things. I do think that sometimes at the startup of a unit, when you, especially when it's a really, really small unit, and then that unit grows exponentially, things have to change. All right. When Detachment 1 started, we were, individually picked. I was like, hey, you're going to be a team leader, Dailey. What, you pick your team, which is, we've talked about before. And that's very rare. It's pretty awesome when you get to do it. But, we couldn't, replicate that times 20. So, you have to recognize that there will be changes and things, missions change. So many things change over time that, and I will, say this anytime I get the opportunity. I mean, the Marines that I have the opportunity to help train now are far, far smarter and have far more complex problem sets than I did, in my day. But that's it. That's why it becomes really critical to identify, like Gronski mentioned. You've got to. It's not a standard if you're not going to maintain it, right? So you've got to figure out what are the things that are tenets to this organization. And when I look at the way I'd sometimes define ethos is like the thing that if you took it away, that wouldn't be the same thing. Right. The way I, with the Marine Corps, and the Marine Corps, in no point have I been able to find the Marine Corps' definition of the ethos of the Marine Corps is this, right? We have lots of sayings and core values, but I think, if John Dailey were picking, the idea would simply that, every Marine is a rifleman. That's the thing. That if you took that away from the Marine Corps, then, the Marine Corps becomes the Army, right? We're not the same thing anymore. The idea that has bolstered Marines from, the chosen reservoir through Quezon and on has been that a cook in the Marine Corps will pick up a rifle and go get on the line if he needs to do that. And that's, as long as you identify and figure out what is the central core to our being and what is the thing that if we take this standard away or we take this bit of our ethos away, then we're not the thing that we set out to be. And I think, whether that's a unit or an organization, anytime somebody kind of loses, like Apple did that for a while, right? They kind of lost the bubble on what they were doing, what their job was, what their core mission was. And if everything isn't supporting that core mission, then you will find yourself going down a wrong road. I'm not even sure if I answered the question or if I went off on a wild tangent.
Absolutely. I'm 100%, and I'm digging it too, because the core tenet, it needs to be understood by everybody so that it can be developed correctly, but it doesn't always need to just be written down and repeated or regurgitated, I should say. Mike, you got any thoughts on any of this?
Yeah. I've never stood up a unit. I've always just kind of happened upon units where I come into them where they're during these transformational times. With 2nd Ranger Battalion, I was there for a couple of years, then 9/11 happened, and I've already kind of described that. I had the pleasure of going over to 2nd Cavalry Regiment, where it was changing from kind of an armor mentality to a striker mentality, but the strikers themselves were changing and the platforms were changing. But then also, hey, we need to be infantry focused because of the missions we need to be able to do in the Eastern Bloc states and all across Europe, to 1st Security Forces Assistance Brigade, and them kind of transitioning from CENTCOM to South America and working in a lot different capacity as an advisor. But back to your original question, I think so. And I don't think that's necessarily because of me, per se, because again, I've never stood up a unit, but because I had a very big mentality shift, and it actually came on the backside of a fault of my own as a leader. So that happened about the 10-year mark of my military career. And it's a shame that it happened at that time, that late in my kind of career, where I left. So I grew up in, 2nd Ranger Battalion, 2nd Platoon Bravo Company. I was there for almost 11 years in one platoon. That doesn't normally happen. There's a lot of circumstance, and that's a whole nother story. That doesn't normally happen. Combat will do that sometimes, though. You fall into things. So I ended up being the platoon sergeant for almost 3 years. Very tactical prowess platoon. I mean, the leaders within that platoon, they thought things before I even said them, because I'd raised them all from privates, every single one of them, for the most part, and then I left that organization, taught ROTC for a couple of years, and then I came back and I watched that platoon going through evaluation exercise. And I'm gonna be honest with everybody, I was sick to my stomach watching this platoon go through an iteration and go through a sequence of events, during a live fire. And the reason is because I was like, where did all of this tactical knowledge and this expertise go? Like, what happened to this platoon that used to just be a symbiotic unit? And it wasn't that they were bad, it's just not what I remembered, and through reflection, through more mentorship and a lot of leadership and understanding, what I realized was I wasn't good at creating leaders. I mentored guys and I was great tactically, but mentoring people and really accelerating and impacting their growth outside of the tactical realm, I sucked. I was terrible at it. And then the next 15 years, that's where I pivoted my focus. And it goes into this mentality that, it's just like being a father. I believe everybody has children. I want my kids to do way more than I ever did. I want them to take everything they've ever watched me mess up and fall and fail at and not do well and do better in every aspect of my life, professionally, being a father, being a husband, all this different kind of stuff. Same with leadership. I want everybody that I've ever led to achieve more in the civilian sector and the military sector than I ever had. So that means I just need to constantly be a best version of myself and giving them everything I possibly can every single day so that they grow to be the leaders that they have. And I don't want to sit here and say that I've done that, but there's sergeant majors and officers that I've helped help them learn, because that's what NCOs do, especially in the 75th Ranger Regiment, that are, division sergeant majors, are eligible on, multiple different lists to go to the next level, general officers, all this different kind of stuff. So I think that, my point being is in saying all this, definitely deviated away from your question, Chance, and I apologize for that, is that, I think while I've never stood up a unit, I do think that I've impacted the greater good. And I've realized that I've been a part of a lot of people's journey and the fortune of being a part of a lot of people's journey. And I'm thankful for that. But it comes on the back of a lot of hard lessons learned and a lot of mistakes that I made. And I'm actually proud of it now. Even though I messed up a lot, I'm still very proud of that. And it's amazing to see.
I love that. Now, okay, well, let me ask you perhaps a tighter version of this question. If you were to think back to some of the more influential Rangers, especially the people you've talked to on your podcast, the guys that were like at the roots of it all, would they recognize the Rangers that are being put out today?
I think they would. I think they would think they were smarter and more talented. But a Ranger is a Ranger at the end of the day, and that it's a backbone of standards, and that the team is more important than I.
Bam! I love it, Shaun. How about your point of view from JTF?
Well, I think it's interesting what Mike just said. I don't want to brush past it. I want to dive into it a bit more. And that is, he stated, generally speaking, that at one point he was mentoring and then he started leading. And that's probably what I was doing as well at one point. And I just didn't even know the distinction very well. I understand it far better now. But at the time, I don't know why I missed that. I don't know why I didn't pick up on it. And I'd love to say it's because I was never taught to, but I probably was. I was probably taught to do it better than I was, but I just wasn't doing it as well as I should have. And it's a pretty eye-opening moment when you realize that you've kind of screwed up in that sense. I'd miscategorized mentorship as leadership. And please don't anyone ever do that now that you've heard that. And so it is an important, it's an important point that Mike made for me because of this. He'd stated that he gains from the realization that he has created other great leaders, we'll say. And that's kind of a hard thing to say out loud. So I appreciate it. What it does, it shows to me anyway, knowing that Mike is a humble guy or has humility. I think it speaks a lot about him that he can say that out loud in not a casual way, but in a good way, in a healthy way. Because I couldn't say that out loud not too long ago. In fact, within I won't get into the details, but I was discussing with some guys from back in JTF2 times, and I didn't think I really did much on the team. I didn't really feel like I added much to the unit, as it were. But he was explaining to me, I won't say all the things that I did, but he explained enough that I thought, well, I guess I did make a tiny bit of an impact. And that's all I would give myself. That's all I would allow myself, was I made a tiny little bit of an impact on the team. And I don't want to say it was anything more than a tiny bit, but you should be able to say to yourself that you made a tiny impact. And you should be able to metric it. And here's why you should be able to metric it, as Mike did. He's being able to track how his influence has created perhaps greater leaders than he is, more influential leaders than he is, maybe more impact within the organization than he has. It's important to be able to see that, because if you don't see it, then maybe you'll struggle to do it for others. I think it's important that we all finally recognize that the impacts that we make are notable. It should encourage us to do it more. Because there's a time when I thought I was making zero impact. And if you feel like you're making zero impact, where is it within you that encourages you to make like zero impact? I never feel like I want to go out and make zero impact today. But there was a time when I thought I was making zero. So it's great that Mike raised that. And now I'm curious as to, back to Mike, I'm curious as to when you started getting comfortable with that idea.
Yeah, I've never thought about it that way, Shaun. And I guess it really kind of it came down to when I got into a senior level of leadership, and I realized that everything that I was doing was indirect. When you're a platoon sergeant, for the Army, when you're a platoon sergeant or a first sergeant or a sergeant major, which those positions can be a little bit different than other branches or other services. But everything that you do is very direct. Do this now. I'm leading this training exercise, all this different kind of stuff. When you start to get to, the command sergeant major level, it's all indirect. It's all guidance. It's all intent. It's all these different kind of things. And there's moments where you could jump down and you can impact things directly. But the reason that I kind of had to come to this realization, and I'm sorry if it did come off as, that I'm saying I impacted all these guys and I'm such a great, I'm not a great leader. I just had really good leaders, and I had amazing epiphany moments that allowed me to do better and to be better. And I still think I suck in a lot of ways, and I still have a lot of growth to do. But, back to the, answering the question, this indirect leadership, I struggled with it because I just wanted to be the guy. I wanted to be the guy doing the things, and I just couldn't do it. Otherwise, I was doing a disservice to everybody. And I was also robbing those subordinate leaders of their professional development by doing the things and making the mistakes and learning the lessons and all this different kind of stuff. So it became down to indirect leadership, and I had to learn how to mentor, develop these leaders and have a trickle down effect by communicating and implementing all these different kind of things so that it impacted the entire formation. And so I spent a lot of time, and I had a really, really amazing officers. Thomas Hof, who was my commander at 2nd Cavalry Regiment. He'd see me kind of spinning about things. He'd be like, "Sergeant Major, like, calm down. Let's have a conversation. What can we do? What can we do? Not no. Don't know." He'd be like, literally, I'm always kind of impersonating him. He'd be like, no, you're not going to go down there and do that. Why would you go down there and do that? Think of the trickle effect of the command sergeant major at this level doing that stuff. No. What can we do that no one else in this entire regiment can do? What resources, what influence, what impact do we have? And I'm like, oh, wow. Okay, you're right. I can reach up way higher than anybody else because of my position, not because of me, just because of the position. And I can pull resources down. I can remove barriers. I can implement change across the entire organization or the area of operation because of this position. And that really just fundamentally kind of changed my understanding And what it translated into, what I kind of shared here is this is, that difficult position that many of us get into. And we've all had these leaders. I've had phenomenal leaders, at higher levels, but they never ever kind of understood that you have a position of power. And I'm sorry for that word, but it's just the truth of it. It's the reality of it. You have that positional power to really drive true change across an organization. But if you don't get out of the weeds, you're never going to do it.
This is a great point, and I'm going to come to John here in a second. I wrote down that zero impact can be detrimental, but it's all based on our focus. And as you were talking, Mike, it clicked in my head that is very similar to when you're the guy on the ground, you have a rifle, right? You can affect the thing that you're shooting at, and you have effect,
I wanted to be that guy. I still want to be that guy.
I think we all do. But then you look at what's the next step up. How can I affect more of the land there? Well, what if I'm a machine gunner? Well, now I have like a beaten zone. I can, my focus kind of opens up a little bit, and I'm engaging things as a larger whole. Well, how do I bring even more firepower? Well, what if I'm a team leader? What if I'm a section leader? Now I can organize everybody shooting, but I don't quite shoot as much. And then you slowly work your way up the rank systems. You're able to really bring down fire. And I was having this conversation with a former platoon commander of mine who was a task force commander when I talked to him. So he was much later, he's using an entire brigade. And he's like, man, the amount of firepower that I can bring down on something is unreal. I got entire squadrons of tanks, engineers, infantry, Air Force. I can bring it all. And I was like, that's a really great point, because you can but his focus has to be that much larger. And when you're talking about leadership or mentorship or ethos, that level of the amount of people that you can impact with those things just increases exponentially as you kind of open your focus up a little bit.
Okay, so it increases exponentially, but also what increases exponentially is your ability to connect to the real moment. So, the person who's got the rifle in their hands, they understand the moment. The person who's got brigades of tanks while he's sipping his coffee and eating whatever, he doesn't have a personal understanding of the moment. So, yeah, as power goes up, the disconnect from the real moment goes up.
Yeah, it's a great point. Dailey, got anything on this?
Absolutely. Yeah, I think what Mike was talking about totally made me think that, about myself. I was in the exact same boat as a platoon sergeant for a force recon platoon, going into Afghanistan in November of 2001. I was at a level of leadership where the mission was the most important thing, and I wanted to be the best I wanted to be better than all the Marines that worked for me. And that was, I think you want leaders like that, at certain levels, but as soon as you kind of jump up the next level, you get, your eyes open and you're like, wait a minute, my job isn't to be faster, stronger, better shot than all these guys. My job now is to employ these guys. And if I'm going to do that well, I've got to, take the things that, mentors, leaders have taught me, and I've got to really teach them. I've got to make them leaders rather than, and I think that's probably the hardest. And it's maybe different for other people, obviously, but for me, that was a very, very hard pill to swallow. Right, going from being in a team, breaching the door, being the first guy in, to being a guy who's sitting back at the vehicle, like coordinating, until you see the like, to kind of counter Shaun's point, you're not the guy with that myopic view, but you're now at the 30,000 foot view, so you see a lot more. You have to. It was hard for me. I suspect it's hard for a lot of people to make that jump from the being within bayonet range to now I'm employing forces with a cup of coffee, hopefully, because I do like a good cup of coffee.
I really like this. And so let me ask this then, because I'm going to bug you, Shaun, because you've dodged a lot of answers by asking a lot of questions. So I'm going to come back to you. Don't worry. But this idea of understanding the moment and being able to, a good leader, let's put it this way, the leaders that I've had that are excellent, that are good, they understand the moment and they want to employ you to the best of your ability in that moment. They want to provide that moment for you. And I was tying this together with John's earlier statement about putting the standard down, is that originally the standard gets brought to the front, right? And bam, okay, boys, this is where we're going to sit. But as the infantry advances, as the battle line moves up, that standard just stays there. And then the echelon has to, direct traffic from on top of the hill, and they're in front of the standard. But when you think about Roman legions, they all had their own little standards. And those were based off of a larger standard, a larger idea of what is Rome and all these things. But do you think that is the kind of the dissemination of leadership, the dissemination of your ethos, is that smaller flag that kind of gets taken from the original? What do you think, John? What do you got?
Yes, absolutely. Well, that's and that's one of the things whenever I talk with units is that, and that's why organizational culture or ethos, should be as simple as it can be, as tightly encapsulated as you can make it, because just within any unit, the smaller, the subordinate unit commanders can make standards more challenging. Right, they can add to, they can't subtract from, and so there's at a regimental level, if I'm saying, hey, here's the 27 standards that we're all going to adhere to, then I'm actually absolutely stifling the leadership at the battalions, at the companies, at the teams. So the goal really should be to say, what is really keeping the main thing the main thing? What is that main thing? And that allows there to be some leaders to express themselves, right? It allows teams to be a little bit different. We're doing one of the things that I've always as a young sergeant, I got the opportunity to go to Ranger school, and it's one of the things that I've always admired about the Rangers is just that
Nice.
you are going to have what a patrol base is going to look like, no matter where you are, no matter and it's that's a standard. But within that, as an element leader or as a team leader, I'm going to, like, hey, I got to put my gun over here. I got to give, sign this TDF. I got to do this. I got to do that. So you've got, and it should be the same with, with leadership. It should be the same with the things that we hold, important to our teams. It should be the same with the, the stories and the symbols that we have. We've, all of our guys wear the little Raider badge. But, down at the team level, like, hey, here's kind of how we implement that onto our shirt. And here's why. This is the team that's, done 27 deployments to Helmand. And this is what we're all about. This is, the Marines that we've lost. This is the way that we're able to demonstrate, right, that we're holding higher standard, but making it our own. If that answers the question.
I dig it. Yeah. And not only that, I like this concept of keeping the core values as simple as possible, because they can be added to, but not subtract from. And that is critical, I think, because as you move beyond the original idea, there's going to be some evolution, obviously, because the moment dictates, right? You don't want to set up a machine gun post behind a hill. That's not going to help you at all, right? You want it to be either at the top of the hill or deflate it a little bit or whatever the tactic is that's necessary. But you want people to be able to think. Shaun, I'm coming to you. What do you got?
Well, I think that the standard idea is great. I believe that the individuals are the standard, the literal flag, and there'll probably be 2 or 3 key players in a platoon that are the standard. And I don't mean like they'll meet the standard. They're just the standard. And that's what everyone strives for. Maybe they're the fastest, the strongest, the whateverest, best shots, all the stuff. If there's a standard within the platoon and that standard is being maintained and well reported within the platoon, young go-getters will be keen to meet that standard and beat it. And so within a platoon, if you've got 3 platoons, you can have 3 completely different ethos that fit within the commander's intent of the brigade ethos, but they'll all be unique to the platoon. And that ethos will have been created at a micro level by the key platoon leaders. And those key platoon leaders, by the way, are not always oriented with rank. You can have a strong private or a strong corporal that is running the whole show and no one's aware of it, just in the background. And so I'm not
Shadow
saying that
banner.
that is the way all the time, but I am saying that that is a thing that can happen. And so leadership and power within a platoon, if we want to call it power, is driven by characters, by stakeholders, by standard bearers. And so that, to me, within a platoon basis, 3 platoons, one can be frickin' smashing and the other one can be a platoon full of slugs. And that is, again, driven by the standard holders within each platoon.
Shaun's going full angelic once again. This is the standard time of the day. Don't mind his camera. Mike, you got any thoughts on any of this?
I wanted to come back to something that John said. These 27 standards that you might have. And we see this all the time in the military. These are. I remember sitting in a brief one time, and the commander got up and he said, "These are my 9 priorities." And this young sergeant goes, 9? Like, you think we got time for 9? Like, we got time for about 3, sir. Like, so what is the priority? And he wouldn't let off of it. And the commander was, he's a lieutenant colonel. He's scrambling to answer the question. He's like, and it goes back into this fundamental thing that if everything's a priority, nothing's a priority. And so, going back to what I was talking about earlier, a little bit, more, Shaun, and it's also kind of, advice I would give, senior leaders is my first year as a first sergeant, I didn't quite get this right. I was still trying to focus on too many things and going down way below my level and all this. And I remember my commander and then my senior rater, in the Army, it's called the NCOER, non-commissioned officer evaluation report. And both of them actually asked me, prior to come up with a narrative of some of the things that I've done my first year. And I was like, well, I've done a lot. Like, I've done so many things. Look at all the things that I've done. I've done so many things, but what I realized afterwards is I've done a lot, but can I take that and make it transferable into leadership and mentorship and then also focus areas for myself? And the answer was no. And, I had another, great leader that told me, prior to me going into being a command sergeant major, he's like, you just got to pick about 3 things. They're going to change. Understand that they will probably change throughout your time, but just focus on 3 things. You'll do 4 through 1 million, but you will always force yourself to come back to those 3 things. And then that way, after the first year or whatever it is, you can look at those 3 things and go, have 2 takeaways from it. Did I accomplish those 3 things? If I did, what are the quantifiable measures that I can actually take and say, I did these 3 things? Or if there's one that you just really didn't do, does that mean that it needs to change going into your next 6 months or your next year? And you might realize, actually, I thought that was a priority coming in, but it's actually not. And then third, on the back end of all that, when you're now a sergeant major in charge of sergeant majors and part of their mentorship and their leadership fabric, you can say to them, hey, when I was in your position, here's the 3 things that I focused on. And here's the results that I got for those 3 things. Here's how it changed the organization, the culture of that organization. I'm not saying use my 3. They're probably not great, but here's some examples. Now go make your 3. Let's assess that at 6 months. Let's assess that at 9 months. At 1 year, let's decide, do those 3 things need to change? And you just continually replicate that as you climb through the ranks. And it just gives you tangible things that you can actually hold on to. And you can actually mentor individuals, because if you're just mentoring or you're doing things, there's so many things happening. What did you actually do?
I did all the things.
Yeah,
So
right.
that's a great logic chain, but I got a question for you now, Mike. Did you have a chance to follow up with those other sergeant majors that you kind of put into that loop and sort of 2 things? One, learn what they learned about the process for themselves, but then what did you learn as an iteration within that greater process?
Yeah. What a great question, Shaun. And yes, not only in service, but also out of service too. I actually just got a text message from one of the sergeant majors that I've been part of his journey from the beginning. He was actually a pack clerk, and then he transitioned over, wanted to be an 11 series, and now he's getting ready to take over the regiment this summer, the 75th Ranger Regiment. And we were actually talking about this, and it's amazing when I have this conversation now with the current leaders in the military, how their three things are so different. And it's all about technology space. It's all about relevance in the global landscape. And to be honest with you, it is way more, I don't want to say politically charged, because it's geopolitics way more than I was. And maybe it's because I'm just an idiot and I'm terrible at that kind of stuff, but the change that it's morphed, and also they're in this weird time. I don't know if anybody watches the American news, but going from the previous administration to the current administration, yeah, it's flip-flopped. It's very different. So it's been interesting to watch. But I will say this, I probably actually need to do a better job of annotating it, because to your last part of that question, Shaun, there's probably more I can learn from that, because there's going to continue to be guys that I'm going to interact with that I had some part of their journey that are going to ask, variances of the same question that you asked, or ask it in a practical sense as they go through their leadership journey. And I probably need to do a better job of kind of quantifying that stuff, so that I can answer the question for them, with all these other, special considerations and the time and the space, in between, because I'm getting grayer, I'm getting older, I'm the gray beard now. And, these are the young bucks taking the fight to the enemy.
Sorry, Mike, I don't know if you talk about this on your podcast much, what you were just talking about, but it seems to me that this is the first time I've heard on a podcast this specific discussion about how important it is to, like at a command sergeant major level, to kind of not only implement these kind of things, but follow up lessons and then drive those lessons into the future, starting tomorrow kind of thing.
Yeah.
Do you guys... Have you talked about that on your podcast before? Or John, have you, is this a common subject down there? Because quite frankly, I don't think we've ever talked about precisely this on our podcast. I've never heard it in Canada per se. So is it a common discussion down there?
I will say on my podcast, Legend of the 75th, it's a leadership podcast that masquerades as, talking about different journeys throughout their time in the 75th. But at the end of the day, depending on the individual that I had, like I just had the regimental psych on for the 75th Ranger Regiment, so we're talking about his perspective, as leadership. But anytime I have a sergeant major on, I make sure to talk about this, because that's what I want to talk about. I mean, maybe I should be talking about what other people want to hear, going back to the previous point about, clips, these short little social clips. Maybe I should be talking about different stuff, but this is what I want to talk about, because I'm just infatuated with the leadership journey and the leadership lesson learned. And at the end of the day, the only reason I stood up the podcast was to take those lessons learned from all these individuals that are legends of the 75th and make it available to the current generation. But also, at the same time, it's always therapeutic for them, and it's good for the old guys to hear it too.
And I imagine you enjoy it as well. That's a big part of it.
Hell yeah.
And just one more question, and then I'm going to leave you alone. Legends of the 75th.
Yeah.
Do non-legends get to go on your podcast? And it's actually a legit question. You know what I'm saying? Because what is the distinction of what is a legend? And so you could have sergeant majors on that would be legends based on the length of their career, or because of the thing that they did, or because of how they're respected, or ... their freaking ethos.
Yeah.
And so, what is a legend nowadays?
Yeah. I mean, you're always a byproduct of picking shitty names. I mean, don't get me wrong, I love the name, but I get a lot of flack for it because of this point. Well, that guy only served, 4 years or 8 years. Yeah, but look what he did after his service. I mean, he has moved mountains. He has went off and just did incredible things. So it's not just about the time in the uniform, it's about the time after, and quite frankly, tying it back to the ethos and what we say in Ranger Regiment. Two different things: once a Ranger, always a Ranger. We stole it from the Marines. Yes, but that's okay. And two, does he continue to live the Ranger creed?
I dig it. I dig it. John, you got any thoughts on any of this?
Yeah, I mean, tons. I've been totally absorbed, listening to Mike and kind of making me think, and absolutely agree that, I have the luxury now of working at a school where, I've been able to see, the senior enlisted, we have a Master Gunnery Sergeants at E9 rank that, I remember coming through our training course as sergeants. Now they're come back as instructors, and now they're coming back in charge of the school. Or they're at the battalion or at the regimental level. And when instructors come in, the thing that I always, beg them is your time here is going to be. It's going to go by in a flash, right? I mean, your time in service is going to go by in a flash, but your 3 years, 2 years that you're here is going to go by in a flash. So you've got to do just like Mike said and pick, 2 to 3 things. What are the things that I really want to achieve? At the instructor level, it's a little bit different because these are guys who are coming off of, multiple back-to-back deployments. So at the school, when they come to the school, it's not, although sometimes viewed as a break, it's not a break. You work your butt off if you've ever worked at a military school, but it's relatively consistent. You know what the training schedule will be like. So, for them, getting to the, physical therapist or physios, and getting recouped back to where they want to be, getting, spending the time with the wives and families, maybe it's college or maybe it's their military PME, whatever those things are. But if you don't have those 3, objectives, laid out, then the 3 years will go by and you're back on a team deploying. It's a little bit different when you become a senior leader, because now you're really looking more at organizational goals. What is it that I want to achieve during my time here? And if that's, like, again, like Mike said, guys are coming in now with this goals that I don't even quite understand, right? Space and lethal robotics and random things that are beyond my brain power. But it's a great advice to, just pick what you can impact and, laser focus on impacting that, while you have the opportunity, and trust that when you pick up and leave, somebody else is going to step in and look, for the next nearest target to focus on.
Those next 2 things, I like it. Shaun, what do you got?
I do want to hit a topic really quick because I've been thinking about it. I'm kind of hearing hints of it in our conversation, and I just want to clear it up so that there's no misunderstanding, at least from my perspective. Like as young men, certainly for John and I, we'd be more senior in age to Mike anyway. As young men, when I think we came in, we didn't have any laser blasters. There was no real space arm. There was none of that. In fact, night vision goggles were a rarity at the time when I first came in. Now, all of that said, the Spartan warrior, the hoplite, the warrior of ancient history, they didn't have any laser blasters either, and they weren't overly concerned with space. And so what they did have was ethos. They had values. They had ethics. They had a focus. They had a higher reason for existence. And so, as a young man, I didn't have like 47 layers of me. I didn't need 47 layers of gear. I just needed a strong ethos. And so, as the years go by, and as all the various units that I've been involved in improve and advance, my question is, are they improving and advancing in ethos, or are they just improving and advancing in technology? Because I know that like Tier 1 or JTF2, I feel like the ethos is strong. It's just that the gear changed. The equipment changed, the technology changed, the tactics changed, the sophistication changed, of course, but the man, at its core, the spirit of the man, doesn't need to change. It's just what gets layered on him in the way of gear and tech and space race stuff. So thoughts. Do you feel that the modern warrior's ethos is any different than the Spartan warrior's ethos?
John, hey, first, what do you got?
Yeah, I think it's become more and more difficult because as you layer all of these requirements and missions and equipment, you eat up time, right? I mean, as a young guy, I had H harness rifle, maybe by the time I got to be a team leader, a PVS 7 or whatever monocular that was, that's all you had to worry about. Keep your kit clean and be ready to go out on a mission. The amount of, and that's one of the things I talk to them a lot about and kind of caution is it's very, very easy to let, things, you can't do everything all the time. So it's very easy to let things slip. And often the thing that slips is the thing that you think that doesn't need tending, right? The plant in the garden that's going to grow. And, it's easy to think of that as ethos because, that was the thing that we joined for. That was the thing that we spent a lot of time on. That was the thing that our forefathers didn't have to think about because they sat around the barracks or the campsite, talking about it because they have nothing else to talk about. Now you've got junior, Marines that are, spend, so much time being trained in all of these different, capabilities that I don't think that it's slipping. I think we're pretty conscious of that, but I think it's something that's very easy to let slip if it doesn't get the attention that it deserves. And a part of it is just, in my opinion, is making sure that we make time at the senior levels, and this is, you might kind of hit on it when he said, when the regimental sergeant major's out, just crushing you on an O course, then, that's a, invaluable use of his time because he's saying that, hey, this is still the standard, and we got to have leaders that are smart and thinking about space, but are also willing to get, down and muddy and prove that, the important things are still important. Rangering, soldiering, marining, is still why we exist. Recently I spent some time with a military group, another military group, and they were trying to come up, what's our culture, what's our ethos, and I almost hate, I told them that I don't think I'd heard the word culture the whole time I was in the, on active duty. Like we didn't talk about it, we just embodied it. We knew what it was. But now everybody wants to have, sensing sessions and touchy feely groups and talk about, well, that's our culture. And the one of the psychs was kind of running a session and they were all separated on whiteboards, putting down words that were important to them. And there was resilience was up there a lot, adaptability, all of these words. And when I went and looked, I'm like, where's killing people, man? I mean, that's why we exist, regardless of what our role in the military is. We got to kill people, we got to be lethal. And if that's not at the forefront of our mind, then all of these other things are leading us down a wrong path. And it's great to be adaptable, it's great to be resilient, it's great to do all these things, but if you're serving in the military of whatever country it is, and you're the first thing at the forefront of your mind when you wake up is not how do I kill people better, right? Then you probably need to ask yourself, what is your ethos and what's going on?
I dig that. Lethality should be a forefront of any military program across the board. Mike, you got any thoughts on any of this?
No, it's a great conversation. I think there's two things that kind of change things nowadays. Is one, what people are doing is just it's out there in the open. Social media, everybody's got a camera, at their fingertips. Not only the camera aspect of it, but they can put things up, memos and emails and texts and everything else. And if you're creating a double standard, which we, talked about way earlier with the other John was, those things are just out there, and you're going to be found out and you're going to be held accountable. I mean, Army WTF, which is something that's relevant down here, you're going to get a call from a commander because they found out something that you did, some general or something, because, some text thread made it out or some picture was taken or whatever it might have been. It's just you're going to be held accountable, not just within the people that you're immediately interacting with, but by the whole stratosphere, universe, and everything else, that's out there. And don't get me wrong, things can be pulled out of context very quickly, and a lot of times are. But I think, when it ties back into the ethos thing, and the question that Shaun had, are we more tied to him than we once were? I don't know. I really don't. Because at the end of the day, coming back to John's point, it's about lethality. Why do we exist as militaries? It's to destroy, deter, and defend, or destroy, deter the enemies of our country and defend, the Republic. And I think we kind of lost our way, and it became more of a lot of other stuff, social experiments, I mean, just to lay it out there, I kind of came to a crossroads of my career. Do I continue to, go through the ranks in the Army? And there was a lot of things that played into it, but one of the things is like, what are we doing here? Like, what I don't care about finger or polish. Sorry, I couldn't think of it. Hair length and buns and stuff like, I mean, is that important? Do I need to have briefs on it? And, I don't want to sit there and air dirty laundry, but, I started to have meetings about integration and adaptability things that we were doing for transgender soldiers. I'm sorry, I don't care. Like, I mean, sure, do and be whatever you want to be. I'm not opposed to that. That's fine. You do you. But if it's detracting away from lethality, that's where I have the problem. And it quite frankly was. And I was having to focus on things that I didn't find important, exactly as John said. Our job's to kill people. It's not sexy. It's not supposed to be. It's not for everybody. It's not supposed to be. Like, we need to kill people, and we need to be really, really, really good at that. And we need to be when we walk into a room, it's apparent we are the baddest, effers that ever walked in the room. And I think we just got away from all that stuff. I'm not saying we're going about it the right way. I'm not going to, talk about politics right now, but at least the conversation's being had. Hey, we got distracted. We need to get away from that crap, and we need to come back to, who we are as a core fundamental. We're not a welfare system, one. And two, we're not a social experiment. Sure, there's things that we need to do, and we need to be all inclusive. And I believe in that. I really, really do. But it doesn't need to be the priority. The priority needs to be, because I don't care who you are, what you're made of, who you share your bed with. I really fundamentally just don't care at my core root as a human being. I actually don't care. You do you, man. Because who am I to judge you at the end of the day? Because I got my own flaws and my own weirdness and all this different kind of stuff. Do you have my back when the rubber meets the road? And can you do what needs to be done to save my life, save your own life, and destroy the enemies of our country? That is all I care about.
There's so much. Oh, John. Yeah, sorry, I had you muted.
Just quick. I mean, you're joining, all of us, we join the military. We join special operations. We join the unit that we were in. The unit isn't joining us. And I tell, young people that a lot. Yeah. The Marine Corps isn't joining you. All right. You need to conform to the norms. This is the ethos, the things that we believe in, because, or do something else, and best of luck to you. Again, like Mike, I don't give a shit about, what you believe, what you like, who you like, but it can't impact lethality. And when it does, or when we're spending all of our time on computer-based training, talking about random things that have nothing whatsoever to do with putting bad guys on the ground, then we're detracting from why we exist.
There's a really good point on this from my own experience. And then I got some comments, and then I got a question, and we can use it as kind of like a final thought here. But right before I left the military, I was part of a group that was studying a system called VBS, which was the virtual battle system. And it was a computer game, basically, that people could work on section level battle drills, and it gives commanders kind of the ability to look at it like a Blue Force tracker and kind of play things around and see how people move. And the question was asked during one of these sessions was like, couldn't we just go outside and do section attacks? Like, can we not just do contact with the enemy and just physically do it? Wouldn't that train us better? And they're like, well, we have more opportunity to be inside and on a computer and so on and so forth. And I'm like, but that's not teaching us how to do this better. Like, this is a tool for a commander, sure, but couldn't you just be out in the field doing this stuff, making people more lethal? But it is a massive, massive challenge now.
Yeah, why would it have been more lethal, though?
Say it again.
Why would it have been more lethal, though?
Because in reality, in real time on operations, you don't get the computer game. You have to be on the ground. You have to be in the field. You have to be, so either whether you're in the back.
I understand that, but what's different on the ground versus you're all hanging out in your laptops?
Inclement weather, rocks in your knees, all the things that are going to happen.
Those are just discomforts. What is going on the ground? I'll get to it because we're short on time. It's communication, it's interaction, it's a human experience. It is actually ethos being developed in real time based on the circumstances, which is not the case when you enter into the virtual space. Mm-hmm. Ethos is diluted in the virtual space. In real time, in the real world, in 3D, that's where ethos is created. That's my only point.
Yeah, 100%. So a couple comments I just want to touch on real quick. Dancy says you can't smell, to answer your question, which is, you're absolutely right. Those things, like, you don't gain that from a computer at all.
You can smell nerd, though. You can smell nerd.
That does have a certain smell to it, let me tell you. Dancy also jumps in and he said, many years ago, I was a young manager. I didn't believe I was qualified, so I was the loud dude. A killick of mine, which is a Navy term for a corporal, looked at me one day and said, "You're a scared little man." And I learned some leadership right there, which is 100%. And then we got Corbin Bobby jumping on the Instagram side, says the lessons learned tuned our SOPs and the way we lead during our entire careers, which is, being able to learn from the mistakes we make is critical. BC Cimmerian says, important point about the standard. When it fell in battle, everyone rushed to pick it up and hold it aloft. It was a great honor to carry the standard. So too today, literally and figuratively. And then Slan23 jumped in and said, the warrior ethos was a great read. The excerpt about the Spartan mothers. They would rather have their sons die on the battlefield instead of deserting the battle. A culture was built upon warriors. And he continues on with, or the boy who stole a rabbit and would have it tear at his gut before dishonoring the Spartan guard and being labeled a thief. It was a way of life. Everyone is held accountable. That's another great point. So the question I have for you guys on this, and we'll use this as kind of our final thoughts before we shut her down. We all went through the system. We went through basic training. We went through our time within the military, and it has affected the rest of our life. It has laid down some foundations that we all still kind of adhere to. And I'm wondering personally what you guys bring forward. What are the things that you still preach? Not so much preach. What are the things that you do to this day that you got at the beginning, at the founding of it all, when you first started? And for John, I know you guys have the yellow footprints, right? Everyone's got to run out onto. And for us, we all run into the mega. And Shaun, you were out in Wainwright on the field right away, I think. But those first few days, those first weeks, when you entered the system, what are some of the things you still take with you? Some of the things you still, I should say, that you still bring with you. And we'll use those as kind of our final thoughts. Mike, we'll start with you. What do you got?
Just show up a better version of yourself than yesterday. When you're going through the pipeline, whatever it is, you need to be better than you were yesterday, mentally, physically, there for your teammates. That's pretty much it.
Okay, well, let me I'm gonna hit you right back on this one. And how do you apply that to your kids, to your family, to the people you work with in your everyday life?
Well, I mean, inadvertently, I'm a human. I make mistakes. I try to learn from them, and I try to be better than I was yesterday. I try to learn from my mistakes, and I try to also look at, things that I do and how I could have handled them better, and be a better leader, better father, better husband, every single day, because that's part of the learning process. None of us have been, I'm 45. Well, I've never been 46, so what can I do now, to better prepare myself? And then when I'm that age, the same kind of thing. And then also, taking all those lessons learned, all those mistakes I've made, and, trying to help my children or help the people that I lead, or, even the podcast itself that, that I run. How can we take those lessons learned from the collective? Sorry, stole that from you guys, I guess. Yeah. But what can I take from that collective, mentality and lessons learned and mistakes made, and pass it on to the future generations in all capacities of my life.
Bam. I love it. John, how about yourself?
Yeah, I think of like a tangible thing very early on, that corporal, the kind of the good corporal that I learned a lot from, named Mike Smith. I think one of the things, anytime we would go to the field, he would just always ask me, what's the best thing that you could do right now? And that's probably holding security, but what could be better than that? The holding security behind a tree, and it went from there. And then he would often ask, what's the next best thing you could be doing? Because, most often you can't do the best thing. So, by, taking time, and it's something I still try to do every day, one kind of an AAR, what did I do good today? What can I do better tomorrow? Like mentioned. But, spending a little bit of time thinking through, actions to reacting to contact, throughout the day, you're always going to, reacting to something, what's the best thing I could do? What's the next best thing I could do when that's not available? And I think those things have made me, a much better person, thanks to a corporal long time ago.
And the funny thing is, I love the name Mike Smith. I know a number of Mike Smiths. It's one of those things from the Army. We use something in Canada called Corporal Bloggins. It's the standard, the dude, whatever he is. Not a real person, but Shaun, what are you thinking?
So from my first career, the three things that I stepped away from that have driven a lot of my life, it comes from three distinct units. The first one is, it's stolen from the Rangers, and it is lead the way. So I always think lead the way throughout my life. The second one is who dares wins, of course, from the British SAS. And then the third one is deeds, not words, which of course is from JTF2. So those three units have led the last almost 3 decades of my life. And, they're simple phrases, and they mean things to me, and they help me do what I do. And I don't think anyone needs a whole bunch of hyper complex mantras or phrases or stories to help them lead a good life. You just gotta cherry pick some freaking hardcore legit sort of wisdom, and then just use those simple mantras to create your own freaking hardcore legit life. So again, lead the way, who dares wins, deeds, not words.
Bam. I like it. The interesting thing, Shaun, that you just reminded me of, that I had a sergeant major during basic training. He came and gave us a speech on day one on what we were going to be engaging in. And one of the things he said that I still take with me to this day is, it's all on you. Your success or failure in anything that you do, it's on you. And the funny thing is, he was a Pathfinder. And he had his torch, and it always stuck with me, because that takes me to this day. And I bestow that same concept in my life so that my kids can see it. Now, interestingly enough, I did forget it for a little while, and I started blaming other people, and down I went. But when I realized, hey man, it's all on me again, I started to make that climb again. And that is the key, is that sometimes we're going to forget our ethos for a little while. Sometimes we won't. But if we always go back to the basics, we go back to the fundamentals that made us, I think we can continue to live a life that's worth living. So I just want to say thank you guys. This has just been fantastic. Mike, John, Shaun, and the other John, awesome conversation today. I can't thank you guys enough. As we all continue to learn, build, and grow. We'll see you next week.
Lethality.
Lethality, yeah. Thanks everybody for watching and being part of the collective. If this has sparked any thoughts or resonated with you, let us know in the comments. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share. Your support helps us grow and keeps the conversation going. We'll see you all next time.